All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the nice introduction and the chance to give a talk here about the Brazilian Amazon. I'm going to share some of our research experiences on how to promote pasture restoration in the Amazon. We all know the Amazon rainforests, right? They are a hotspot of global biodiversity. They regulate the precipitation patterns in South America, and they store huge amounts of carbon. However, we are still losing ground on an accelerated scale. Deforestation is happening every day, and although the local drivers may vary from time to time and space to space, we know that cattle ranching is still the most important driver of deforestation in the Amazon. Estimates suggest that between 60 and 80% of all areas are converted into pastures after deforestation. And the cattle sector amounts to 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions of Brazil. We also know from past experiences that often cattle ranching is taking place in a kind of vicious cycle. Okay? People deforest areas, they create productive pastures, those pastures degrade over time, the soils get impoverished, and people rely on deforestation again to increase or maintain their production. Now, how about if we could break that cycle, right? If we could break that cycle through restoring what is already deforested and thereby creating new productive pastures. Well, at least in theory, we would expect that we would have kind of a win-win situation. People could maintain or increase their production, and we would have forest conservation. And how does it look in theory? In Brazil, we have currently 111 million hectares of pastures. Half of them are in the Amazon. And they are most poorly maintained and poorly managed. Well, modeling studies suggest that we could double or triple production on those areas, and we wouldn't have to chop down any single tree anymore if we restore pastures, if we increase productivity. Well, that sounds very fascinating, right? Doesn't it? Well, in fact, it sounds so fascinating that a whole lot of people from the conservation community started to finance pasture restoration, started to engage in the cattle sector. Well, it sounds great, but let me be the devil's advocate here for a second. Is it really the case that restoration leads to forest conservation? Or could it be the other way around, that we need to protect what is left in order to restore pastures and create an adequate incentives for farmers to maintain their areas? That's a classical chicken or the egg problem, isn't it? Like, which came first, chicken or the egg, restoration or conservation? What do we need? And why is it important to ask that question? Well, it is important because ultimately it determines the policy tools that we need for that. Do we need to protect the forest with a stick? Say, you can't deforest here anymore? Or do we need to provide an incentive for the farmers? So kind of give them a carrot, give them an incentive, help them, technical assistance, credits, whatsoever, what's or not. Now, what better place to study this phenomena than the Brazilian Amazon? We saw huge decreases in deforestation between 2004 and 2012. Why? Because of environmental governance. So we had a very effective law enforcement system where people actually went to the place where deforestation happened. They were assisted by a monitoring system with satellites, and they could fine people for illegal deforestation. We had the expansion of a protected area network and an improvement in the system of land regulation. Now, if it was that environmental governance drove restoration, we would have to see that in that period here, right? Now, what better people to talk to than the protagonists of change themselves? So we went to the Amazon and we talked to hundreds of farmers about their production system and cattle ranching in the last 2 decades. And what are our main results? Well, the first result is that, in fact, 50% of those people acknowledged that the current regulations and law enforcement made them change their minds towards restoring pastures and increasing productivity. Okay, so one of the phrases that we commonly heard was, if it wasn't for the regulations and the authorities on the ground, I would not have any single tree here standing anymore. Well, that kind of confirmed what we thought. But what else did they tell us? Well, 90% of all pastures are restored on only 10% of the farms. Okay, and these are medium and large farms mainly. So we said, what happened to the small-scale farmers? 80% of the farmers in the Amazon are small-scale farmers. Okay, so when we talked to these people and we investigated the phenomena more closely, we saw that two factors are of paramount importance. First, literacy. People have to be able to read and write. And second, basic farm management, bookkeeping. Okay? If people can assess the costs and benefits of different production options, they are more willing to change than those who have no clue what is happening. I have 3 takeaways for this session. The first one is that the environmental sector needs to refocus on helping people to enforce existing regulations. Why is that relevant? Because in Brazil we saw budgetary cuts of 50% for the ground personnel. Yeah? And we will see a relaxation of the regulations in the upcoming years because of new political preferences. Let's put it like that. And we have to be aware that behind our data, pixels, satellite images, there are people. There is a social dimension involved. And my argument is that if we lose the small farmers in this battle, we will lose the fight for the environment as well. Now, my third argument is that we need to integrate policymaking. And by that, I mean that we need to get the agricultural sector on the table and first make them aware that, look, you think we are the antagonists, all right, but actually, environmental governance can help to increase restoration if the areas are limited. If we want to restore landscapes, we need to have them on the table and tell them, look, we have social consequences. So you guys should provide assistance because you have the infrastructure and you have the amount of money that is necessary to help those who are left behind and who cannot improve their production systems by their own. And a very important approach to do so would be to focus on basic human capacity building. Thank you very much.